Welcome back. The case against Eskom and government is in court this week. The National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, Numsa, together with Saftu, UDM and over a dozen other applicants, want the state to be held liable for power cuts. They also want government's response to the power crisis and rolling blackouts deemed unconstitutional. To find out more about the case, I'm joined via Zoom by Numsa National spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. Thank you so much for your time this evening. So you're not launching this application alone. Before we kick off with the details, give us a sense of who's driving the court application alongside Numsa and providing much needed support.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me on your show. Yes, this is a multi-stakeholder court action which involves several organizations, including Numsa, as well as the UDM, as well as Hayitu, the Health and Allied Indaba Workers Trade Union, Saftu, and other organizations, including a small business forum. And essentially what we want is we want the court to recognize that there are critical sectors of South African society which must be exempt from load shedding. And we've identified those critical sectors as education, health, small and medium enterprises, as well as the telecommunications sector, which all of those sectors have been hardest hit by the devastating impact of load shedding. And we're asking the court to grant these sectors of the economy exemption from load shedding.
So you're also asking for exemption for education institutions and the broader health network of South Africa. You're saying that power cuts are caused by deliberate state action, negligence of the state, I'm quoting here, and general disregard for the obligations of the state under the Constitution. And of course, the court is going to require that you provide evidence to that effect. Are you ready for this court action?
Indeed. In fact, today we heard evidence from the Health and Allied Workers Indaba Trade Union, Hayitu, whose testimony, together with the testimony of Professor Matiba of Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, was quite compelling and is actually central to the case, because the arguments that they're making is that load shedding is a life and death matter. It literally results in deaths, unnecessary deaths in public hospitals. We're talking about 80% of public hospitals let me rephrase that. All our public hospitals service 80% of the public. The majority of these public hospitals are not exempt from load shedding. Dr. Matiba spoke about how the load shedding has an impact, for example, on ensuring that lab tests and lab results maintain, the right sort of integrity, because obviously if they're exposed, if they're not sort of contained properly or refrigerated properly, those lab results then stop being reliable, and that can cause death. The fact that critical equipment like ventilators, especially for newborns, how that gets affected by load shedding to the extent where babies' lives are put at risk. She spoke about patients suffocating as a result of load shedding. And she even said that often the cause of death is not load shedding. They won't reflect it as load shedding when they're writing up the certificate, but they themselves as health workers know that that person would have lived had there not been a power cut. And really, the fact that Advocate Ngugai Tobi did an excellent job of presenting what that means on a day-to-day basis for health workers every day in this country. The fact that we can no longer treat this as just power cuts. It's a humanitarian crisis on a grand scale, where this government has actually failed in its constitutional obligations, not only to guarantee access to healthcare, but also the right to life, because of deliberate decisions that it's taken. And in our papers, we say they've done so willfully, which has resulted in the situation we find ourselves in today, where we've got high levels of rolling blackouts.
Apart from the relief you're seeking in terms of exemption for these various critical sectors that you're mentioning, that's quite a damning indictment, if the court should find in your favor that the government and our president have willfully neglected their duty in terms of the Constitution, what punishment do you think, as Numsa, would be fitting?
Well, it certainly would mean that the families of those who lost their lives as a result of load shedding would be able to claim from the state. But the primary remedy that we are seeking in terms of our court application, we're seeking two remedies. Our primary remedy is, as I said, that these institutions must be exempt from load shedding. If, for whatever reason, they cannot be exempted from load shedding, then because the courts recognize that there have been infringements of fundamental rights, the state must be compelled to provide these institutions with alternative energy sources in the form of solar panels or any other alternative energy source, which would guarantee uninterrupted energy. I must also add that the other sector that we are fighting to be exempted is the South African Police Services, because we, as part of our submissions, also submitted evidence about how our police stations are unable to operate optimally as a result of persistent power cuts. So this has an impact in terms of, safety, general safety of the public. On top of that, you're talking about the fact that the working class and the poor, certainly those who are depending on public school education, their education is actually compromised because every time there's power cuts, those children are sent home. So they don't have the benefit of being in a private school where generators kick in. They are losing days of learning as a result of load shedding. And when you read the state's response, which frankly has been quite shameful so far, they just seem to wash their hands off the whole situation. The presidency, for example, is at pains to declare that they are not responsible and that the focus of power generation is the preserve of municipalities. DMRE blames Eskom. Eskom blames DMRE. And so our argument to the judges has been that we want these judges to hold all of these organs of state accountable. The fact of the matter is they've known since 1999 that we were going to experience serious power shortages if they did not augment the capacity problems at Eskom. And their failure to respond to that and to take decisive steps since 1999 means that they are responsible for the crisis that we find ourselves in.
Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be keeping their eye on that case. That was Numsa National Spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola.